Hello and welcome to another edition of Turned Out a Punk. I'm your host, Damian Abraham, and once again I'm bringing you a conversation with someone who grew up listening to punk, may or may not still be involved with punk, but had their life changed by the genre in a major way. And today on the show, a legend, a guitar legend, arguably from one of the first punk bands ever, PAUL THERRIO, guitarist for the Imperial Dogs, joins me today for, this is such an amazing conversation to get to have for me, because this is a band that really kind of kicks it off for certainly one part of the world, but we will talk about all that in 1 second. First, if you would like to get in touch with me, head over to the email address turnedoutapunkpodcast@gmail.com. That is run by my brother and show producer and guest booker extraordinaire, Tristan Abraham. I love you, Tristan. Thank you for all the hard work you do, and he will get the message to me. You can also find Tristan running the Turned Out a Punk Instagram page and the Turned Out a Punk Facebook page. If you want to support the show, the best way to support the show is just by telling all your friends about it, letting everyone know that we do this podcast where 1 week it's Dallas Green, 1 week it's the guy from the Imperial Dogs, 1 week who knows where it goes next week. Punk is a very broad term, and we try to encompass as much of it as we can here on the show. So let those people know about it. You can also subscribe to it and rate it on your podcast platform of choice. And thank you to everyone that does do that over there on iTunes. Really do. Really means a lot. Thank you very much. You can also support it by heading over to patreon.com/turnedoutapunk, where we put up footnotes. There's also some video versions of some upcoming episodes and some past episodes and things like that. So head on over there, and thank you to everyone that does do that. It really does keep this thing going. Really does do that. So thank you very much. Also, speaking of support, this show would not be possible without the kind support of the fine folks at Vans, who came aboard a few years ago and said, Damian, do what you do, but we want to help you cover the costs of doing it. And they do. They help me cover costs, which who would have thought there were costs associated with doing a free podcast, but there are. So thank you very much to Vans for helping me deal with those costs. And if you want to check out the band I play in, Fucked Up, we are coming to some cities. I'm not going to say your town necessarily, because I don't think we're going to that many cities, but we're going to a few cities. First of all, we're going out on tour with Faith No More this September. Check out the dates over there. If you just look up Faith No More Fucked Up, it'll come up. But you can also find them on fuckedup.cc, where you will also find information about the David Comes to Life 10th anniversary tour that we're going to be doing in the beginning of the next year, 2022. And we might be coming to a place near you. We're going to be announcing more dates, and Matador is going to be reissuing that record. And also Tank Crimes has put out Year of the Horse, which is the hour-and-a-half long song that Fucked Up did over the last year or so. I guess it was pretty much a year that we worked on it. Yeah, they were working on it for like 5 years on the music stuff, but about a year I was doing stuff on it. So you can check that thing out. Really proud of it. I think we all are in the band, and you can find that over there at tankcrimes.com, which is run by Scottie Karate, my buddy, my pal, my longtime friend. Tell Scottie I say what's up and order that record. And that is it. All right, on to today's show. Today on the show, PAUL THERRIO is here from the Imperial Dogs. Now, the Imperial Dogs are a band that existed to me only really in legend for the longest time, and then I eventually tracked down the posthumous single, which was put out by Backdoor Man Records, which was the label run by the people that did the fanzine, early LA punk fanzine, a couple years after that, and finally got to hear them, and oh my gosh, this band is incredible. They are highly influential. The song, This Ain't the Summer of Love, in title, and I think they took one of the lyrics and the general vibe. Blue Oyster Cult had a massive hit with that song, but it's not really a cover when you hear the original. It's kind of like a reinterpretation, and I do love the Blue Oyster Cult version, but I gotta say, the Imperial Dogs version is like one of the greatest punk songs ever. There is very little documentation of this band. There's that single which came out in 1978. Then in 1989, Dogmeat Records, the great Dogmeat Records out of Australia, did a reissue, which we talk about in the show. And then there's a DVD which came out, I guess 12 years ago, 11 years ago now, of this one infamous show that they did at a university. You can find a couple clips of it on YouTube. I'm going to warn you in advance, if you get on that thing and check out that video, Some of the stage adornments don't age particularly well. There was definitely a drive to shock with a lot of the stuff that was coming out in the early part of the punk wave. So just be forewarned about the bass player's cabinet decoration. But barring that poor choice in stage wear, they are without a doubt one of the most incredible live acts I've ever seen. Not in person, of course, but on this DVD. You got to check this thing out. It's wild. Like, it's so weird with punk because, we talk about this on the show all the time, but in the mid 70s, you have this energy that kind of goes around the world and hits in different places. And you have these bands kind of seemingly spawning out of nowhere. I guess a love of the Stooges and sort of like a rejection of the music stuff that was happening around them. But you see it in Australia with Radio Birdman and the Saints. You see it happening in England with like Dr. Feelgood, and I guess you could say the Pink Fairies as well, and Hawkwind, and I guess a little more hippie stuff. But England's a little more complicated, but you see it in New York, of course, and in LA, you see it with the Imperial Dogs and Zolar X and all this incredible crop of proto-punk that was coming out of that city. I don't think I need to ramble on anymore. I do recommend you check out this band's songs as if you can, because they are really kind of the forebearers for what would come a few years later, certainly in Los Angeles. All right, I'm not going to ramble on anymore. Sit back, relax, and enjoy Paul Theriot on Turned Out a Punk. Paul, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Well, as I was just telling you off air, I think This Ain't the Summer of Love is one of my favorite punk singles ever. So to get the chance to kind of nerd out and punish you like this is a big thrill for me.
Well, thank you very much. I thought it was one of our better songs, and I don't know. I wrote a cool bass line for it, and I just like the overall composition. It was okay.
Well, let's start off the way they all start off on this show, which is, how did you get into punk? Do you remember the first time you ever came across the genre, or even heard the word? I guess.
Uh, Probably first heard the word in a William Burroughs novel or something. But there wasn't punk per se. Well, probably heard it later. And do you remember Cream magazine?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, it was like Lester Bangs probably used it more than anybody early on. It really wasn't punk per se when we had our band. It was just before all that.
Well, yeah, I guess getting to, because obviously you're one of the first punk bands ever, if not the first punk band ever. So what were you into? Like, what kind of music, and how'd you get into music in the first place?
Well, I got into music as a saxophone player as a kid. And when I got to be like 16, I ended up in a professional big band with a guitarist named Lee Ritenour. At the time, I thought I was a hotshot sax player. Then I heard Lee play guitar, and it's just like, nope. Like, how much you practice today, Lee? 8 hours. I go, well, jeez, I need to surf and smoke hash. Jesus Christ.
So,
Anyway, in high school later on, that's where I met Don and Tim, because we were all in the band, in the high school freaking band. I was playing sax and they were playing trumpet, and that's how we met. And once we got starting to play together, nobody could play. That was a problem. But we loved the music so much, we kept at it, and then eventually found a drummer, and it morphed into this band.
so how long before the band formed did you kind of switch from sax to guitar?
Oh, about 5 years, but I really wasn't serious about guitar until this band thing started. And then I had to go from not being able to do anything to having to do something pretty quick. So,
Yeah. So what kind of guitarists were you listening to around that time that you first got into it? Like, who are some of your guitar heroes?
wow, that's pretty loaded. I mean, the normal British folks, Jeff Beck et al. Uh, I was into a lot of the country blues slide players and Chicago electric players, Buddy Guy, stuff like that. But it's pretty much a blues, R&B, and rock and roll influence overall.
Well, you mentioned Cree magazine earlier. Like, where were you hearing about music from? Was there like a particular record store you were going to? Because, like, this is kind of not necessarily the stuff that was being played on popular radio, I imagine.
No, and we were just like rock and roll junkies, so we found this magazine somewhere, and I don't know. Patti Smith wrote for it. Lester Bangs, who's from my area here, and or was, and it was just like the all the remnants of the reviewers from Rolling Stone that we actually liked.
Were there any local bands kind of happening around that time?
No, it was really tough because there was no place for to play for original music. You pretty much had to be back in those days. There were no public venues that would hire anything other than a copy band.
Mm-hmm.
So the influx of a lot of new bands came after we were pretty much done, in the mid 70s. And then, more and more venues started opening up to that, and including some larger ones in Hollywood. But
How aware were you of like kind of the that sort of garage rock scene, like the Seeds and all those bands that had happened sort of a few years earlier?
well, you just brought up a subject, who were the original punk bands? Well, the Seeds were way before us, and they would definitely fall in that category, as does Rocky Erickson and
Mm-hmm.
a few others. The Standells, now that was a punk band. I mean, yikes.
Absolutely. Well, I think like, once again, it's very different than what you guys were doing. I think, it's a great
Yeah.
leap from them to you guys. I think, yeah, there's a certain sort of, it's amazing watching that footage from that 74 show and just seeing kind of like the archetype of a band that would kind of come, a few years later, a few short
Hmm.
short years later, but like, yeah, like it still exists today, right? Like you guys could play a show, if bands could play shows now, I mean, but if you guys could play a show today and it would still seem new.
Yeah, especially if everyone was alive.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I think being situation being very different than it
uh,
is actually.
we had a lot of influence from the early, crunch guitar metal, if you will. I remember in 1970 when the Man Who Sold the World album came out. I never heard a guitar that sounded that badass ever. I mean, it's like, wow. And another one that had a major guitar sound was the Move album called Shazam. I don't know if you've ever heard that.
A fantastic record, actually. I got my
Yeah.
father-in-law's copy. But no, an incredible, and you kind of like it's funny because like there certainly are these sort of swirling around sonic influences that would coalesce at a certain
Oh
point,
yeah.
but like
Hmm.
just but like the style and just like the confrontational element to it, like that just feels like just so different than stuff that was happening before you guys.
Well, that's what we were trying to do, and I mean, to be honest, we were catering to some of our favorite writers in the business. I mean, look at Blue Oyster Cult. They had shit. Half the writers were in the journalism business, which is probably a good business move on their part.
Yeah.
They didn't need it, I don't think, but I mean, half their songs have six authors on it. It's pretty hilarious.
Well, yeah, because there's like Meltzer
Yeah,
from Vom, right? He was writing for them too.
yeah, yep. I remember him.
Were those types of people kind of around at the same time? Like, were you guys all going to the same sort of shows?
Not necessarily as friends or knowing we were going to be there, but yeah, most likely. I mean, like Like the first time the Pretenders came to town, I'm pretty sure everybody was pretty much there for that.
Going back prior to that, what was the first concert you remember going to?
Huh. This is rather strange. I'm trying to think. Well, it would be the Stan Kenton Orchestra at El Camino El Camino College.
And was that like just like did it just happen to be there, or was that a group that you kind of followed prior to that?
It was a. I was in this big band at the time, and Stan Kenton was on the board of directors, and my saxophone teacher got me tickets for it. So, and it was just I could walk to it from my house.
Did you kind of get taken at that point? Like, did you know that like performing was something that you wanted to kind of pursue? I guess
Not
it's like a
necess-
totally different thing than what you wind up doing.
yeah, not necessarily, but I did enjoy the music. So.
What were some of the first rock concerts you remember going to?
Oh, let me think here. I actually went to a Crosby, Stills and Nash concert, but Taj Mahal opened up, so that was really cool.
Oh, that's awesome.
At UCLA, Pauley Pavilion. That might be the first. But then I'm trying to think, we didn't have, most of us we were poor boys, so even though concerts were like $5, but I remember going to us piling all into a van and going to the Palladium in Hollywood to see Alice Cooper. But what's great about that concert is Howlin' Wolf opened up, but he just sat on a rocking chair with no band, just him and a guitar. So that was pretty cool.
Got quite the run of opening acts there.
Oh yeah, yeah. Taj Mahal, Howlin' Wolf. Yep. I can give you a classic opening act at the Whiskey Go Go Sursa mid 70s. The Raw Power Iggy era was playing at the Whiskey Go Go, and they were doing like a 5 night stint. But the we went every night, but the first night it was like a special opening act, and everybody piles in there. And the opening act was a band called Rufus with Chaka Khan,
Oh
and
wow.
that was their showcase. And so they're actually opening up for Iggy. But the cool thing is nobody gave them any shit. Everybody appreciated their skills, and there was just no bad vibes or nothing.
Mm-hmm.
It was, it, I mean, then you got Iggy coming up, which is a whole different thing. Those shows were amazing. I mean,
Oh, those are like
there were
that's one of the most legendary runs of shows ever, right? They did two runs at the
they
whiskey,
did
right?
two runs. They did two runs because the band was living together on the first run, and we come back from a show, and we just for some reason just go in the house and start breaking furniture and shit. So I'm not making that up.
Oh, that's
I
so
mean, those
awesome.
shows were really, really fucking amazing. And then it was the next round when they got Scottie Thurston on keyboards. You know who that is?
No, who's Scotty? I know. Obviously, that second run of shows, and I've heard those
Yeah,
bootlegs.
well, Scott Thurston, he was kind of a semi-session guy at the time, but they picked him up, and his piano playing just was perfect for the raw power songs.
Mm-hmm.
He ended up getting hired by Tom Petty, and was in Tom Petty's band for the last 15 years before Petty died,
Wow.
because he could play any instrument, he could sing any harmony, and yeah, great guy.
That run of shows is obviously incredibly legendary, and there's been a couple of people that have been on this podcast that were there. Like Keith Morris was at one of the shows and things like that. So it feels like it's one of those shows where everyone in the room winds up starting a band a few years later, or winds up doing something in music. Like it just feels like that kind of like energy around it.
Well, that's what they always said about the first Velvet Underground album. Not
Yeah.
too many people bought it, but everyone that did ended up starting a band, and count me in on that, because that did happen to me. So, And that was, quite frankly, the Velvet Underground album is the first album I ever bought.
Oh, that's awesome. So where'd you hear about the Velvet Underground?
I knew some pretty sick people in high school.
Mhm. Well, yeah, because you guys just all seem so ahead of the curve. Like, even talking about being into the Stooges and these sorts of bands, like, once again, like, you know better than I, but these are certainly not mainstream bands at this time.
Well, they never were. I mean, I'm still amazed at what Iggy eventually became. I mean, he's like beloved now and very successful. And when I knew him, I had several contacts with Iggy. I mean, he was a stone junkie, man, and he was in bad shape. I mean, the first time I met him, he just looks at me kind of cockeyed and goes, "You got any pills?" And I'm just going, "No." But, but so I got another Iggy story. Like the apex of my Imperial Dog days, we played this gig at this place on Sunset Boulevard called Rodney Binghamheimer's English Disco. I don't know if you've ever heard of
Oh
that.
my gosh, it is a favorite topic of mine to try and bring up on this show. So I cannot wait to talk
Oh,
more about
okay.
this with you.
Well,
Absolutely.
we were hanging out there a lot because it was a cool place to hang out.
Hmm.
Anyway, Rodney came up to us. I heard about your band. I want you to play here. I want you to play here. So we do this gig there, and Iggy's there. Like, great. We get done with the gig, and Iggy just comes up, puts his arm around me, and says, "Man, that one song, Bad and the Beautiful, I really want to do that on my next record." And then he named off a couple more songs, and I'm just going, "Yeah, I'm done. I don't need to do anything more. Eh, I've had enough of the band stuff."
Oh,
I
that's
mean,
amazing.
mission accomplished.
Well, it would have been so awesome to hear him do those songs too, because
Well, the problem was he was an addict, and Bowie, who was going to produce the album, was really coked out. And they both ended up shortly thereafter at a UCLA medical center for a little tour of the Funny Farm. And I guess once they got out, they just got down to the business of doing a David Bowie Iggy Pop record. So
that's the
yeah,
idiot, I guess, right?
it would have been nice, but hey, I understand.
Well, it's still like that's the other thing about the band. It's like another band from this kind of like pre-punk era where before everything kind of coalesces and things, start going in that direction where there were bands that were just kind of had that sound before, like, like ahead of it all, like yourselves. Um,
Well, like New York Dolls, even,
yeah, definitely. Well, like, how about the New York Dolls? Did you see them when they came through?
Oh yeah, yeah. The first time they came, it was at the Whiskey A Go Go once again. I've seen several great bands at the Whiskey A Go Go. That was a great place to go. But yeah, that was fantastic. That was a gig where they get into LA, and I don't know what the bass player did, Killer Kane, but he ended up getting his arm broke. I think his girlfriend broke his arm.
Whoa.
And so they had a standing bass player. It was one of their roadies. Goes, "Yeah, I can play this all day long." So and Killer Kane was standing there with a cast on, just watching. So,
Like
yeah,
standing on the stage, or did they at least let them
yeah.
stand off stage?
Have you read the book Please Kill Me?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
I
Years
think they
ago.
talk about that somewhere in there.
I got to reread that now.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's one of the,
yeah.
that
We
because that
actually
was
had the author of that book over at our house at one time.
Legs McNeil, right?
Yeah.
It's amazing because he's like, obviously they're on the other side of the country, around then a little bit later, kind of doing the same sort of thing. But it's just
Uh huh.
it's so amazing how there's all these pockets of things kind of going on.
Yep.
What about Zolar X? Were they a band you were familiar with? Because they would have been at Rodney's too, right?
Yeah, I actually saw them at a place called the Palladium, which is a big, giant shithole. It's like if you took CBGBs and made it 12 times bigger,
Yeah.
maybe 120 times bigger. Anyway, they were opening up for somebody. I don't remember. I think it might have been Mata Hoople. Anyway, it's kind of like this sci-fi bullshit and all that. But standing in front of me was it's a science fiction author from Venice, California. What's his name? The Illustrated Man guy. Uh,
Oh man, I should know this.
Throw me a bone, dude.
I don't know. That's what I'm wondering. Okay,
Yeah,
give me I can edit
Illustrated
this
Man.
in.
Oh, anyway, God, it's on the tip of my tongue, but he was standing in front of me and he had a minder with him or something. And he
Oh,
was
Ray
just,
Bradbury.
yeah, Ray Bradbury. Yeah, thank you. Whew. Wow, got bailed out on that
I'll
one.
fix it. I'll fix it in the editing. You just say Ray Bradbury, and I'll fix it
But
up.
I recognize that I've read Bradbury as a kid, And I knew what he looked like, and there he is standing right in front of me. Because there's no place to sit at the freaking Palladium unless you sit on the floor. And, yikes. But yeah, the Zolar X was kind of like it. Meh.
Well, I guess like how did Imperial Dogs come together? Like how did this sort of band, and how did you wind up on this sound?
Well, in high school, at least towards the end of high school, we all realized we had this common. The three of us, me, Don, and Tim, had this bond about, we were really into, rhythm and blues, rock and roll, and we just were really into the music. And somehow, as time went on, I got a guitar and Tim got a bass, and it's like, well, where can we get together and play? Which is no place, but we managed to do it here and there when somebody's parents were gone, and it just kind of went on and on. And we all had jobs because you know you got to work, and in just the limited free time we had, we'd get together, and then it came a little more. We got into everybody's schedule, got more free time where we could play. Uh, Put an ad for a drummer and found this wonderful drummer. I mean, that drummer we had was really amazing, and it just kind of morphed into this band. And we started writing more, and you know, just it just morphed into what it was.
Was that the sound you guys wind up with on the live recording and on the single and on the LP? Obviously, was that the sound you had right off the bat, or was that kind of like like feeling out process to get there?
There's an evolution, of course. I mean, uh, but as far as the we were into the hard beat and the fast beat from the get go. I mean, we were into doing, old Kink songs and shit like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's
It feels like it. Yeah, definitely. It's like it's obviously there's similarities to bands like the Stooges and bands that are doing that sort of thing, but there's definitely like a lot more of like sort of a pop songwriting than the Stooges had, especially on the early Stooges records.
yeah, but in retrospect, that first Stooges record sounds really poppy to me right now because pop music sucks so bad. But you really think about it, because they had, they only had like three songs when they got signed, and Ashton had to whip out enough licks or progressions, whatever, for the rest of the album, and Iggy had to really write lyrics quick because they only had like 3 weeks to do it, and they pulled it off.
Oh yeah.
I prefer the second album a lot more because that's when they're cut loose, But
Mm-hmm.
those are still classic albums. I mean, I think John Cale produced the first album. Yeah. A friend of mine. You live in New York?
No, Toronto.
Oh, you live in Toronto. I, ah, but a friend of mine in New York. He's a sound engineer. His name's Harvey Goldberg, and he produced a John Cale album. And he said Cale would sit in a room, he'd trap a fly under a glass, and he wouldn't move until the fly died. And then it was like, I'm ready to play
Oh
now.
my God.
That's a true story.
That's an intense pre-show ritual.
Yeah, we we were into all that Velvet stuff and John Cale. I'm still a big fan of his. Yeah.
Did Lou Reed come through solo? I guess first, or when did the Velvet Underground? Did they come through?
No, Velvet Underground was loosely put together. It was part of the Andy Warhol
Oh yeah,
art collective thingy,
yeah.
and when the band really, started actually being a band, it was basically Lou's band.
Hmm.
Then the moneyed interest forced them to hire a woman singer, and that's how Nico got in.
Did they ever come out to California and play?
I think they did, but I was way too young to even know about it,
Yeah,
and no way I could get there. I think the bikers out here really liked him.
yeah. It's such a
like,
like. Go on, sorry.
I've heard of like concerts out here where the PA was so poorly wired they could put the mic up to their mouth and then whip it away, and there'd be like a a spark thing just going, and they keep doing it. Just yeah.
Uh, well, I guess that makes for a show you'll never forget playing.
Yeah, I wish I'd seen those. One of them.
What about like what was the scene kind of like when you guys were playing shows? Like what were the kids around you? Were they like glitter kids or is it sort of X, or not X, but like people that are like
It'd be pre-X,
yeah
and
pre X, definitely pre X. But I mean like were they like
well, we didn't. There, the glitter thing was going, but that wasn't the kind of people that seemed to show up at our gigs. It just was just regular Joes.
well yeah like that's the thing is like you're kind of there's it's before a scene I would imagine would form. Like were there people that would wind up being in like these bands a few years later coming to see you guys?
Uh, I would imagine so. I talked to remember a band called the Dills?
Absolutely.
Yeah, they had seen us back in the day. By the way, the bass player died, and the guy with that beautiful low voice. Oh
Hmm.
my God!
Yeah, rest in peace. Absolutely. An
I
incredible
mean,
band.
yeah, Tony Kinman. He was singing once. I walk up to him. I go, "You got three balls or what, man?" Because that guy could sing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oof.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, like, so what were like was Greg Shaw and the Bomp scene and the Nerves, were those bands kind of like adjacent, or is it a completely different scene than what you guys were doing?
No, it was about that time. We knew Greg Shaw, and then who was the other writer that had the Angry Samoans?
Metal Mike Saunders?
Yeah, I think so. He had really bad hair. That's all I remember. Yeah, it was right about that time, and the LA punk was just germinating then. Like about the time we split, a year later, you could actually see X play somewhere.
Hmm.
I mean, we were at a show at this place called Under the Pier in Redondo Beach. I think my wife's band was playing, but they opened up for X, and X was playing. And, I hadn't heard him before, and it's just a nice, tight little club. And they got a couple songs in, and then the power went out. And Billy Zoom grabs an acoustic guitar and plays Alice's Restaurant, some Bach fugues. It was pretty classic.
I guess I wanted to talk to you about that recording session that wound up being on the 7-inch and then ultimately the Dog Meat LP. Um, how did that session kind of come about, and like how many of those songs like were written beforehand? How many were written kind of in the process of demoing them, or was it even a demo session?
Uh, First of all, this wasn't actually a demo. It was a cassette recorder with two lousy mics in a garage that was insulated with old carpets, to keep the noise in. And somebody managed to digitize them and clean them up a little bit.
It sounds great on the seven
That was
inch.
the extent of our technology at the time. We certainly couldn't afford to go into a studio. No fucking way. I mean, we were all living week to week, and we were all working, but it's not like we were rolling in dough.
No, I know, but the single sounds amazing. Like it definitely, it says live on the back, and I expected a live recording when I bought it all those years ago, and then hearing it, it was like I had no
Hmm.
idea it predated everything either.
That particular song, it lends itself to low grade recording equipment because it's kind of got a soft sound but a hard beat. So
Where did that title come from? Because you came up with that title, right? This ain't the summer of love.
yes, I did.
Where did the
I
idea
came
for
up,
that came from?
I came up with the title and the music, and Don filled in the rest. And yeah, and I wanted to get the bass player more involved in the band. So I go, you know what? This is a really good opportunity to do a nice intro that's primarily bass. So I wrote that thing. I didn't write it. I wrote it in my head and showed Tim, and he was just all excited. And he got all fired up. And yeah,
Aesthetically, who were your kind of influences on like what you dress like on stage? Like who were you guys inspired by?
I don't know. Say Mott the Hoople. Uh, it was, just, you know, we couldn't be too picky because, like I said, we were, all poor. I think those pants I was wearing, my sister sewed them. Don found a cheap ass fabric somewhere. And, yeah, that's why I didn't wear shirts 'cause I couldn't afford them.
Did you have that skull painted on your chest that's on the cover of the Dog Meat LP?
No, no. Well, Don did it with a Sharpie. That was on the in the alley behind Rodney Binghamheimer's. Yeah, Don just did it with a Sharpie real quick. Yeah, yeah, okay, great.
But you guys would have like chains and have these props on stage that you'd have to make yourselves, right?
Well, first of all, when we played Rodney's, the chains were easy. John just brought one tire's worth of tire chains,
Yeah.
and we brought a friend of ours there, and we had him in a wheelchair, and he got a plethora of blood caps on him. And in the middle of one of the songs, you have a poor little man in a wheelchair. Don starts very gently chain whipping him
Oh my god.
in the wheelchair, and then there's just fake blood everywhere. It was pretty classic.
Was that coming from Alice Cooper, do you think, the theatrics?
Uh, well, it was probably an influence. I
Mhm.
mean, we were into Alice Cooper way before even I'm 18 came out, when he was recording with Zappa.
Yeah, definitely.
He had a record called Pretty's for You that I really liked. But
Easy Action 2 is a killer album.
yeah, but when Love It to Death came out, there's very few records I would call perfect records, but that one's damn close. I mean, every song is strong, tight, loud, and kicks ass. And I
Yeah.
was 18 when it came out. So.
And no, I didn't mean to say like also that you were like aping them in any sort of way because obviously what
No, 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 no. Everything is everybody's influence. You have influences you like, and try to emulate them. So,
absolutely, but what you're doing is so much more extreme, like the whipping someone with a chain in the audience, like it feels like, it's just this sort of like amping up that would eventually kind of become punk rock a few years later, and like you see, bands like
yeah,
the Bad doing that in New York a few years later.
yeah. I mean, most of my favorite punk bands didn't resort to theater. Not that I'm against it, but yeah,
Well, there is like even in that live DVD video, like from that show you guys played, it's just like the level of aggression, like screaming at the audience, and they're all just like standing there, and
yeah. That was the weird thing about that time. Even
yeah,
if people liked you, they would just stand there and stare.
yeah,
I'm not kidding. You know, I we got used to that. But we see these same people coming to the few gigs we had, and it was like, okay. But
it's
yeah,
it's funny because people come on this podcast that play in bands, and start playing and getting into punk when it starts happening a few years later, when it really comes together and solidifies, and they keep talking about the fact that there was this energy, and it was just like it felt like it was just something that was coming together, like it felt
it
like
was, and it was coming together in three main different places, and
Mhm.
maybe four. I'll even count Australia, but it was L.A., New York, and London, and it was all three completely different things, but it was coming together at the same time. I mean, but look at the disparities. Look, the most successful bands out of the New York punk scene weren't punk. It was Blondie, Talking Heads, and Mink DeVille.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, like,
All great bands,
yeah,
you
oh
know.
yeah, definitely. But
And
it's
London was totally different. L.A. you had X and just a plethora of really cool bands. You know, the Alley Cats. I don't know if you ever heard of them. They
fantastic,
were
man. Absolutely.
they're fantastic. I mean, the first time we saw them, we were in this club, and they're coming in, and the bass player, Diane Chai, I believe her name is.
Hmm.
She's like 4'8", and she's got a PA column under each arm walking through the door. I'm just going, you got to be shitting me. I go, I got to see this band.
Well, yeah, like what did you kind of think, a few years later when you do start hearing bands like Radio Birdman, like, and here's this band that's on the other side of the world, and obviously doesn't sound like what you guys are doing, but you're still on the same sort of like wavelength.
It sounds great. I'm glad people are still got some passion for some ass whooping music.
Mm-hmm. What were some of your favorite other punk bands other than the Alley Cats, like when that started popping off?
In that era, I like the Dills. Uh, there's this other band was friends of ours. They weren't punk, but they were a band that evolved with the Imperial Dogs in the same fucking neighborhood. Was the Zippers.
Oh yeah, fantastic band.
Well, the drummer for the Dogs ended up being the drummer in the Zippers down the line. And,
And they're also on Backdoor Man Records too, right? The single.
I think they did a single, but they did other stuff that was well, they did demos with Ray Manzarek produced.
Oh shit, that's awesome.
Ray Ray gave Bob Willingham, the lead singer, he gave him an old pair of Jim Morrison's pants. And Bob puts them on. He goes, "Man, they're awfully puffy in the front, dude." True story.
Did you ever want to do another band after Imperial Dogs? Like, obviously, you've done stuff more recently, but like, I mean, back then, did you ever try and do another band right
I
afterwards?
was at. It was. I was so burnt out from that I didn't want to be in a band for a long time. I mean, I was an avid surfer, and I pretty much had to give that up for that period of time. So I got back into surfing, and it's just like, whoa, yeah, what was I thinking? And I had a career I was working on, and you got to make a living. But I don't know.
What about a few years later when all the surf bands started going? Like, were you aware of all like, like, I mean, all the beach bands, kind of Black Flag and those sorts of bands going off?
Well, interesting you bring up Black Flag. I used to live on Monterey Avenue in Hermosa Beach.
Mhm.
Shortly after I'd quit the Dogs, about a year afterwards, I'd be cruising down Monterey Avenue, and I hear this band playing. Well, it's this band there, and they're playing Ziggy Stardust copies. Well, that was Black Flag. That's where they lived, or one of the parents lived.
That would probably been when they were like first forming, like when they were called Panic, even or something. That would have been really early on, I
Yeah,
imagine.
but it wasn't long after that they had the Pollywog Park incident. So
Yeah, yeah,
I'm sure you're familiar with that.
absolutely. Well, like like much like the Stooges at the Whiskey in your show, like there's certain shows that I'm sure at the time did not feel nearly as big as they've gotten as the legend have kind of grown.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
What did you kind of think when, your single came out? Did you guys ever do any reunion shows around that or play any gigs to promote
not
that single?
really, not really. Like even when we broke up, there really there was no place to play.
Mm-hmm.
We had to rent places to play. I mean, there just wasn't venues that would support original music unless it was already established.
Yeah. Well, that's why you guys, I guess, or wind up playing a university. Like it's just there's nowhere else to do it
Right.
with all the lights
But
off.
that's what I like about now. I mean, we have a place down in San Diego called the Casbah, and you'll have 40 different bands playing there every week.
Mm-hmm.
And I never heard of any of them, but I'm pretty stoked that all these people are forming bands and having a little fun.
Well, yeah, it must feel amazing to kind of be, at the cusp of this wave that is still kind of crashing to this day with all these bands, like all over the world.
Yeah, yeah, and there's different pushes in different places.
Absolutely. Well, anytime, Paul, you want to come back on this show and talk about any of these days, you're more than welcome to come back here.
Oh, thank you. All righty.
Thank you, Paul, for coming on the show. And hopefully Paul will come back because that guy has got some stories. Those are some amazing stories. Also, we didn't really talk about it, but Aerosmith, in the same way Iggy Pop approached it about covering songs, apparently also wanted to cover a song at some point I was reading recently. This band is fascinating. Like, holy, am I interested in learning more about this band and all the LA proto-punk. This stuff is this is my bread and butter getting this stuff. Okay. Coming up next week, next episode on this show, I'll never get that right. From the band King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard and the Murlocs, Ambrose Kenny Smith will join me to talk about. We get deep in Melbourne music history. Like he schools me on some stuff I did not know about, and we talk about some Sharpies, and we got some cool places. This is a fun little conversation that is coming up in a few short days. You only got to wait a few short days for that one. All right. Remember, as always, Black Lives Matter. The lives of Indigenous people matter. We need to protect trans kids. We need to help trans people protect themselves. There needs to be a stop of hate and violence towards Asian people and just hate and violence towards people of different faiths. And these aren't political issues. This is just basic human rights shit. This is the most basic human rights shit. So do what you can. Get informed. Get involved. There's lots of organizations that are doing a lot of great work right now, and just fuck Nazis. Like they just there's no space for that shit. There's no space in this place for all the hate. You can also go there and make your own culture. Anyone can do this shit. Start a band, start a fanzine. You never know. Maybe you invent a whole music genre. Maybe you invent something that people are still obsessed with, nearly half a century later at this point. Like, look at what Paul did. He just went out there, played guitar in this little band. Who would have thunk it that I would be obsessed with this band all these years later? So get involved, do something. It'll help your mental health. And speaking of helping your mental health, try meditating. It might not work. It might work. It worked for me, and I didn't believe in it. I did not believe in it. So maybe it'll work for you. You can also sign your organ donor cards, because by the time they come looking for those organs, you don't fucking need them. They're just dead weight, literally dead weight. So just get them out of my body. That's what I'm going to say. Get these things out of my body. I don't need them. And maybe they're going to help someone else. Maybe I can speak from personal experience of seeing it help someone else. So, be kind to yourself too. Just try and stay kind to yourself. We're all too negative. We got to stop this negative self-talk, myself included. Just be kind to yourself. Go easy on yourself. And that's it. Stay safe, and I will see you on the next episode. Thanks for listening.